Good evening. The UPA government seems determined to keep the reform pedal firmly pushed all the way down and is asserting itself as a reform-friendly government. The Union Cabinet approved a slew of proposals this week towards that end. The land acquisition bill has been cleared, there is a new urea investment policy, and the Cabinet Committee on Investment has been set up as well. The CCI has been set up in place of the proposed National Investment Board, or NIB. The committee will be chaired by the Prime Minister himself and will monitor and advise ministries on expediting projects with investments of 1,000 crore rupees and more. However, the CCI will be slightly different from the proposed NIB in the sense that the final decision on clearances will still rest with the nodal ministry, for example, with the Environment Ministry in the case of an environmental clearance or the Defence Ministry in the case of a defence clearance. The NIB proposal had wanted the body to be vested with the final nod on all large projects. The CCI comes into being at a time when regulatory delays have been holding up projects worth nearly 2 lakh crore in the road, power, coal and mining sectors alone. A typical infrastructure project requires clearances from 19 ministries and on an average 56 to 60 permissions on issues ranging from the environment to defence. The whole process could take up to 24 months sometimes. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight on The Big Picture, we discuss this new set of reforms that the government has cleared. We take a look at the CCI and the gigantic task ahead of it. We also ask our panelists what comes or should come next. Is the CCI still a toothless tiger as the final clearance authority still rests with the nodal ministries? Will this work the magic it's supposed to with investors and industry? And lastly, we'll take a look at some of the other reforms on the anvil and what could be their possible fate given the atmosphere of partisan politics that seems to be plaguing our parliament recently. On the panel tonight, in the studio is Jagannadham, Thunuguntla, Equity Head of SMC Capital. Welcome to the show, Jagan. Also, Mythili, Bhusnurmath, Consulting Editor with the Economic Times. Many thanks, Mythili, for joining us. I'd like to start with Mythili, if I could. Mythili, this was long pending. The government seems to have swung into action. How will this realistically affect fast tracking of projects? And also, there is huge symbolism attached to it more than anything else. How do you see industry, by and large, responding to these measures?
Well, Athar, I think the biggest thing that it does is that it kind of changes sentiment to some degree, because there was a view that the UPA government has lost all interest in reform. It's not going to do anything. It's a lame duck government. So I think that the most significant change really isn't that, because as far as just setting up a committee in itself, it's a little naive and a little unrealistic to expect miracles overnight. But the fact that it's going to be chaired by the PM does give it a certain prestige, a certain clout. So it's reasonable to expect certainly that things should move faster than before. But whether it will change things dramatically overnight, I don't think that's possible at all. And neither is it really very realistic to expect it. But certainly it sends a different signal altogether. It sends a signal that this is a government which means business, which is going to do something. And that, I think, is a significant signal, particularly as far as foreign investors are concerned.
Right. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about the realistic chances, but that's in just a bit. I'd like to come to Jagan right now and ask him. You heard what Mythili said. More than anything else, sends out the right signal, and is there symbolism attached to it more than anything else?
Absolutely, it's a step in the right direction because when dealing with so many ministries, naturally there will be many ifs and buts. To keep all that account, I think they have done a fairly good job in creating it. But nodal ministry angle sometimes may prove to be a little tricky. But having said that, in a democracy you have to live with this kind of complicated equations, and in that sense it's a good project. It's a good approach, and that has actually sent a positive note to the market as well. If you see from the capital markets, of course, capital market is not everything, but nevertheless even to that extent. So all in all, it's appearing that at least 6 months back it appeared that it's almost India growth story is over. Right. Now it is appearing that India growth story is slowly coming back. May not be in the vigor with which probably one would have loved to see. Or the pace with which, but right. Nevertheless, slowly things are falling in place.
Right. We've also been joined by Renu, Kohli, former staff member of the IMF as well as the RBI. Many thanks, Renu, for joining us on The Big Picture. Mythili, Bhusnurmath and Jagannadham, Thunuguntla are your fellow panelists. They just mentioned that more than anything else, it sends out the right signals, clearing the CCI, the Cabinet Committee on Investment now. What do you think, your reaction on the symbolism of clearing these projects, first of all, and do you think they have a realistic chance of fast-tracking projects and getting the kind of investment that the government wants?
I think the mission of the CCI should be to go beyond signaling, because much of the reforms that have taken place and the moves that the government has taken in the last 2-3 months have been a signal, and therefore, one can say that there is enough signal of change. But to say that those signals have restored investor confidence to the point that to change the entrepreneur's willingness to undertake large capital investment it would be incorrect at this point. So the role of the CCI should be aimed explicitly at that. And in that sense, I think there are a number of stalled projects. And to begin, if the CCI starts with unclogging at least 1 or 2 stalled projects, large capital investment projects to start with, that would go a long way in changing entrepreneurs' willingness to undertake investments. That is the need of the hour, and I think it has to go beyond signaling. The investment cycle has to be upturned again.
Right, fair point. Mythili, Renu thinks that this should go, especially the CCI, should go beyond signaling. Also, I want to ask you, Mythili, if I could come to you, the problem, as Finance Minister Chidambaram put it, he's time and again said, is not conceptualizing projects, but getting them cleared in a time-bound manner. Is this then, Mythili, the game changer? As the Commerce Minister called it today, he describes it as a game changer. There is a fair bit of scoffing going around on that particular term.
Well, I think that is really being a little ambitious, and it's a bit of an exaggeration to call it a game changer. I would call it an enabler, a minimal enabler, which should have been there earlier and hadn't come on. So to that extent, it's certainly nothing more than an enabler, because at the end of the day, even if you get clearance, and this is just one kind of clearance, because there will be many clearances that are necessary also at the state level. So after that also, I think the biggest problem in India today is not just of clearances, but it's also of policy flip-flop. So I think until you send a very clear signal to investors, whether domestic or foreign, that we are not going to shift the goalposts halfway through the game, I think this will just go, to meet a small part of the need to assuage the feelings, the worries and the fears of investors. So I would certainly say, let's not be cynical. This is a step that the government has taken. It's a positive step, but it's only a small step. There's much more that the government needs to do. But to the extent that one hurdle has been removed, hopefully a number of the projects, particularly in the infrastructure area that we sorely need, at least there we can expect some forward movement. So as I said, it's a small step, but it's not an insignificant step.
Right, Jagan, Mythili is right. Let's not be cynical about it. But the problem is, realistically, let's not be cynical. We agree, it's a small step in the right direction, but it's not really the game changer that the government is describing it to be.
Yeah, one is this will solve a lot of the symptoms, not the disease, because you will see the symptoms in the sense when the CCI sort of is in the control of the whole thing and Prime Minister is looking, then if Environment Ministry is creating the problem, at times it puts additional pressure on the ministry that they have to be very, very categorical in why they have objections, and it can't be just passing on time or just wasting time kind of approach. So all in all, this will solve some of the symptoms, but underlying disease of that getting seriousness and getting that urgency in every aspect of it, I think probably that needs to be, that can be seen only if at least 3-4 projects, let's say in the next 3 months, if we can see big 3-4 projects at least get cleared, that will send a message probably we are even tackling the disease as well, not just the symptoms.
Right. On that note, we'll take a small break. We'll come back in just a moment. I want to talk to Renu Kohli about some other reforms on the annual and what could their possible fate be. That's after the break. Don't go anywhere. Keep watching The Big Picture. Welcome back to The Big Picture. Renu Kohli is still with us. Renu, it may have taken some time, but the government is piece by piece coming good on what they had promised, long-awaited decisions, even if they are diluted by one reason or the other. Is this a good sign for reforms to come? There is the all-important Banking Laws Amendment Bill on the annual, as well as Insurance Reform Bill, as well as the Pension Reform Bill is also on the annual. The last two, the Pension Reform and the Insurance Reform, require parliamentary approval, which is a completely different ballgame, of course. But the UPA government on the right track, would you say that?
Yes, I would certainly say that. I would also add that it has all the sincerity and intention to restore and do all it can to put growth on a firmer footing and try and return it back to its trend path. It's also trying to do the best it can in its endeavor to get some bit of opposition political convergence to get some of the structural reforms going. And you have not mentioned the goods and services tax, but I think we might look forward to some kind of consensus emerging, maybe if not by the end of this financial year, perhaps over the next 1 year horizon. So the steps are in the right direction, and there is a lot of effort and sincerity. But at the same time, I'd like to add that all these things take time to have an impact. Structural reforms do not impact in the short run. So in the short run, I think lower growth and some bit of pain is unavoidable for for the country as a whole.
Right. Mythili, lower growth and a bit of pain. Do you agree with Renu there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the government's efforts really should be to educate the people, to tell them that, look, the whole world is going through a slowdown. We are part of the global economy. There's no way that we can kind of escape entirely. So it will be a little unrealistic to expect a return to 9 to 10% growth. So we are going to see slower growth, but the government will do whatever it can to cushion the shock, to ease the pain for those who are going to be most hurt. So you need to sell your story well. So I think that is where the government has failed. And if it were to take these reforms in a phased manner, like in the case of oil decontrol, if you were to increase prices steadily over a period of time, announce some kind of a roadmap, that would be much more acceptable to the people rather than suddenly kind of raising the price, then next day rolling back. So I think the government needs to get its act together and then tell the people that, look, this is something that we're in there for the long haul, but we're there with you, we'll do our best. And the government on its own also tries to cut back on wasteful expenditure, prioritizes its expenditure, and shows its sincerity to the entire reform process.
I want to discuss something with you, the problems the government could face in the next step of the measures that they might want to take. The banking bill and the insurance bill, as I mentioned, are next on the annual, but the opposition has made it clear that they will not support the government as far as these two are concerned. They are still stinging from the victory the government got on FDI and retail, and if going by that, it's not going to be easy to get parliamentary approval for the banking bill as well as the insurance bill.
Well, Athar, as we've seen in the case of the FDI debate, if the government is sufficiently serious and sufficiently keen on getting the support, it's not very difficult, given our Indian polity, to get that support. Now, how that support is obtained, I would not comment on, but I think everybody knows that if you want, there may be a political price to pay, as we've seen in the case of the reservation bill, promotions and reservation. But I think if the government is really determined to get the support, support is available. For a price maybe, in terms of political ideology, whatever you may say, but it will not be that difficult for the government to get people on board, because our political parties are not necessarily driven by any firm commitment to any ideology or any beliefs as such.
Right. Mythili, I want to come to Jagannadham right now. Let's talk about the NIB, which used to be called NIB, now it's called the CCI. The infrastructure sector has been facing a very tough time due to policy paralysis, if you want to call it, slow approvals, no certainty as far as approvals are concerned. This committee, in its mandate, in its manifesto, will fast-track nods to mega projects of 1,000 crore and above. However, infrastructure players themselves, major players in the infrastructure sector, are not too excited about this diluted version of the NIB, the CCI. They feel that this is a diluted version with no real powers and less than what the original proposal was by Mr. Chidambaram, what he had envisaged. Major infra players are not that enthused with the CCI. Do you share their view? Do you think it's too much of a dilution of what Chidambaram had envisaged?
No, one thing, something is better than nothing. I think we have to take some heart from, as we discussed, that no point in being cynical. And infrastructure become the biggest hurdle in reaching that 9% growth. And if we can able to solve that, it will create lots of employment opportunity, lots of creation of capital expenditure, capex cycle will get created, and investment cycle will build up, and entrepreneurial spirit can come back. Of course, for all these things to happen, there should be a real action. At least some decisions have to go through. And as rightly said by Mythili, that in India, after that, especially FDI and retail, what the message is loud and clear. If FDI and retail, which is the most sensitive decisions, if that can be passed, then I don't think banking, insurance, pension, come on. I don't think, nowhere near of complication that I think they will sail through.
Staying on the potential problems, let me go to Renu Kohli and ask her this. There is this view, Renu, that the new CCI broadly mirrors the old CCI. The Cabinet Committee on Investment mirrors the Cabinet Committee on Infrastructure that has been disbanded now. The question being asked is this: why do we need to abandon the Cabinet Committee for Infrastructure and create a Cabinet Committee on Investment with practically the same set of powers dedicated to it? Does that make any sense?
Well, to the extent that it covers overall investment and not just infrastructure investments, one could draw a distinction. But I think the major point is that the CCI will probably endeavor, or at least to my mind, it should endeavor to restore the damaged confidence. The biggest fallout or outcome over the things that have taken place in India in the larger political economy of things is that the very foundation or the bedrock of investments has been challenged and has been shaken by the reversibility of decisions, either due to the processes of courts or due to regulatory changes or reversals. And I'm not, without commenting upon the morality or ethicality of it, the need is actually to go, is to resolve issues of land, pricing of natural resources, allocation of spectrum, etc., in a way that is in conformity with the constitutional framework of the country to reassure entrepreneurs that these are irreversible. And I think that's a very important, factor, which is deterring investments. And the investment cycle is not going to be revived just by a matter of, a couple of strokes. There are deeper fundamental issues that need to be resolved.
Right.
And for that, political convergence has to come about.
Right. Let me go to Mythili very quickly, very briefly. Mythili, before we take a break, do you think the criticism that it's coming the CCI's way is that it broadly reflects what the older CCI was? What's your view on that?
Well, it's not very different, Athar, but as I said, it would be unrealistic to expect the government to do something very different, given the fact that different ministries are pulling in different directions. And I think it is for the Prime Minister to show that he is the boss, he is the first among equals, and he will call recalcitrant ministries into order.
Right, right. We'll take another small break right now on The Big Picture. When we come back, we'll look towards the future and what realistic goals the CCI can achieve. What could be the possible hurdles for the new CCI? Don't go anywhere. Lots more to come on The Big Picture. Welcome back to The Big Picture. We're discussing the slew of reform measures that the government has just taken this week. Saw the clearance of the land acquisition bill. Also, the CCI, the Cabinet Committee on Investment, has been approved by the Cabinet. It will be headed by the Prime Minister. Dr. Manmohan Singh will head it. I want to go very quickly across to Renu, Kohli, who is still with us. Let's talk about the land acquisition bill for a bit as well. That has also met, Renu, with a fairly tepid response from industry. Industry says that it will only increase the time for clearance and maybe even the costs. Do you see that also being a stumbling block for large projects which are trying to acquire large parcels of land? Could that be a problem?
It would be a future problem, but let us make a distinction between projects that are stalled and projects that are that may be contemplated in the future. I think that the CCI's intention, and where it might differ from the previous CCI, which was known as CCI on infrastructure, would be to play more of an activist and an interventionist role, and therein lies that would depend exclusively on its ability to find convergence across the spectrum between environmental issues, fuel supply linkages, land acquisition related problems, which are the three major problems for which a number of projects have been stalled. So land acquisition would be a problem, and as the CII has said, the cost of land acquisition could go up considerably, but there is a manner in which things have to be done in the country, and it has to be fair to all, the process has to be fair to all stakeholders.
Right.
Now the issue is about 80% or 70% clearances.
Go ahead, please.
That issue is... yeah, I just wanted to say that the percentage, one can look at it in two terms, that a democracy by nature, even in terms of voting, a 51% is a majority in a democracy, and that does not take care. It's very hard to aggregate individual preferences to form a social welfare optimum, and that is the problem with land acquisition too.
Right. Let's get Mythili's view on this. Do you agree with industry? By and large, the response has been that the land acquisition bill is also also a diluted form of the previous draft, and it doesn't really help them. It might just make costs go up again. What's your view on that?
Well, given the fact that it was such a contentious kind of piece of legislation, I think there was bound to be some change between the earlier bill and the present bill. Having said that, I think industry is right in saying that it will increase the cost for acquiring any kind of land, and also if industry itself has to acquire 80% consent, it is going to make the entire process much longer and much difficult. So industry has an entirely valid point. Of course, government has to keep the political aspect in mind, so presumably that's why it was watered down. So maybe there can be some kind of thing that, because particularly in the case of public-private partnership, I think there's a slightly different kind of clause. So maybe the government can think in terms of, whether government acquires the land and then hands it over to industrialists, because otherwise if you leave it to industry, it is going to be very, very difficult. So for land-intensive projects are going to take a hit in the process.
Right. Jagan, your view on the land acquisition bill?
Absolutely. That 80% is very tricky, because even if you say take any housing society where people who live in Delhi, Bombay, they know that apartment buildings where they live, even if a decision has to be taken there, simple like painting the apartments or let's say renovating the apartments, I think 80% consensus is very difficult to achieve. On top of that, the another big problem is sometimes the landowners, difficult to identify and difficult to locate. Some of them may be in abroad or something. So 80% is appearing to be a little on higher side. I feel that in mutual discussions or something, probably that may be revised downwards if it has to really help the industry.
But do you think the CCI now, the new CCI, the fact remains that the nodal ministries, for example, the Environment Ministry in case of environmental clearances, they still have the last word. And the CCI, the new CCI, can play an intervening role, not the final law. Do you think that sort of kind of gives out mixed signals?
The conditions like that, the ministry has to take a decision in 30 days. If not, then CCI will, whatever decision CCI takes, it will be final. What it is telling to the nodal ministry is that take your decision, it's fine, but be in time. So question is here about speedy right. decision. You may say, no, I don't agree to this project, that's fine, but take the decision quickly. I think whole CCI, what it will do is it will speeden the process. Whether that will lead to the more clearances, I don't think so. It's a question of speeding the clearances.
Right. Let me go to Mythili very quickly. I know, Mythili, you said before that if FDI and retail can be managed, then insurance and pension reform should be a piece of cake for the government. But the fact remains there are political hurdles and the government can't accommodate everyone. Are there any other options for the government to build consensus on issues, on bills like the insurance bill or the pension bill? There's the banking amendment laws, extremely important for new banking licenses. Do you think the government has any options other than to accommodate the political allies and such like?
I think maybe if the government were to kind of take the opposition along, like in the case of the banking bill, I think there was some contention that because the standing committee had made certain recommendations and the government had made some changes, agreed that there is nothing that is mandatory about the recommendations of the standing committee. But having said that, by and large, it would have been better if the government said that, look, this is the recommendation of the standing committee, but for the following reasons, we want to make these new clauses, introduce these new clauses. Are you okay with that? Whereas when the government seems to kind of bring in new clauses through the back door, as it were, and the opposition is taken by surprise, I think that is what really gets their back up. So it would be good if the government tried to work in partnership and the opposition also played its role and supported the government on what is good for the country. If you had bipartisan support for sound policy, though in the case of the banking amendment bill, I don't think the idea of allowing banks to enter into the commodity futures market is a very wise decision. But whatever the government's desires, whatever the government's reasons, it would have been better if it had taken the opposition along, took them into confidence, and then added the clauses rather than suddenly springing it on. I think that's what the opposition objects to, being taken for granted.
Right. Renu, very briefly, if you could, that could be a problem in the Banking Laws Amendment Bill, letting new bank entities in that sector go into futures and commodities. Do you think that could be a potential stumbling block when the government is trying to bring a consensus on that particular bill?
Yeah, that could be a contentious stumbling block. I agree with Mythili, and I do think that can be a problem, particularly as it has been sneaked into the bill after being cleared by the standing committee.
Right, right. Jagannadham, if I could ask you the last question on the show, where do you see markets going after that? You did say that the markets reacted positively to the news of the CCI coming up, but do you see the markets reacting even more positively in the days to come, perhaps in the short term?
I would like to see it from pre-September and post-September, because it's a series of reforms that started coming in September once the Chidambaram started announcing. And the market has already rallied about 12%, 13%. That's a significant jump in 3 months gap. So what it shows is the market is definitely liking what it is happening, especially China is slowing down, US and Europe are any which way in doldrums. Probably it may be an excellent time for India to really catch up to the game and then absorb some of the inflows. Of course, India knows for it messing up at the last moment. India never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Right. So in that sense, we have to be careful on that.
Right. One last question. I have time for one last question. I'll go to Renu Kohli briefly, ma'am, if you could. Someone just mentioned, I think it was Mythili who mentioned that shifting goalposts, of course, always scares investors more than even policy paralysis. Do you think there's a danger of the government doing a flip-flop again? And isn't that something that should be avoided at all costs?
See, I don't think there has been a policy paralysis. My view is that it has been more of an outcome of certain processes that have been taking place, which are beyond the economic realm. All of us are aware of these processes. There are decisions that can be challenged. There are decisions in the first place that have been made in an unfair, unreasonable manner. And to undo all of that and put in place a proper regulatory mechanism as far where, natural resources allocation, land, etc., land acquisition, etc., is concerned, will take time. First of all, the political convergence has to be brought about. A new equilibrium has to be established as far as regulatory mechanisms are concerned. And thereafter, the private sector will have to respond accordingly. Right. So that is a structural change that we are talking about in a larger sense.
Right. Thank you, Renu Kohli, for those comments. I must end the show. We're running short of time right now. I must thank all my guests before I sign up. Jagannadham, Thunuguntla, thank you so much for coming to the studio. Mythili, Bhusnurmath, many thanks for coming on The Big Picture, as well as Renu Kohli. Many thanks to you as well for coming on The Big Picture. Like my guest today, of course, said, there is no need to be cynical. It is a step in the right direction. More symbolism and sending out the right signals by the government to investors, as well as industry. Give it some time. Things don't happen overnight. These measures will also take some time to actually bring the fruit that the government actually wants to see. That's all the time we have on The Big Picture. Till next time, Athar saying goodbye, good night, and thank you for watching The Big Picture.